There was a time when music filled every corner of the Miller house, soft jazz drifting through the air, laughter following each note. But that was before the accident, before silence became the loudest sound Ethan had ever heard. Subscribe for more stories that remind us broken dreams can still play beautiful tunes. Jack Miller wasn't just a musician. He was a man whose soul lived inside a violin. Crowds clapped, strangers smiled, and for a moment, the world seemed brighter when he played. But when fate took his hand, it also took his song. Years later, that silence still haunted the family. Jack repaired instruments he could no longer play. Mary worked endless shifts to keep them fed, and Ethan, just 13, watched the man he admired most disappear into quiet heartbreak. But Ethan refused to accept that silence. He believed that somewhere, deep within the cracks of his father's broken violin, the music was still alive, waiting for someone brave enough to bring it back. And one night, when the world slept, the boy picked up that dusty violin and began to fix not just an instrument, but his father's dream. Jack Miller was born with music in his veins. Long before the accident, his world was a melody. Every sunrise a rhythm, every rain a note waiting to be played. In small-town Oregon, folks knew him not by name, but by the sound of his violin. When Jack played, conversations paused, glasses stopped clinking, and even the restless wind outside seemed to quiet down just to listen. He played for weddings, town fairs, and Friday nights at the Blue Willow Cafe, his favorite gig. People said he didn't just play music, he spoke through it. The way his fingers danced on the strings, the way he closed his eyes before each final note. It was as if he poured his soul into every performance. And his family, Mary and little Ethan, were his biggest fans. Ethan would sit backstage, wide-eyed, watching his father under the warm glow of the cafe lights. He didn't understand chords or scales, but he understood magic, because that's what it felt like when his father played. But magic, sometimes, is fragile. It was late one winter evening when everything changed. Jack was driving home from a show, snow falling thick across the highway. He was humming a tune, one hand tapping the steering wheel, when a truck skidded on black ice and veered into his lane. The crash was loud enough to wake the sleeping hills. When Jack opened his eyes again, the world was blurry, filled with the distant wail of sirens. His left hand, the one that guided every note he'd ever played, was crushed beyond repair. Weeks passed in a haze of hospitals, surgeries, and promises from doctors that he would adjust. But how do you adjust when your purpose is gone? When he finally returned home, his violin lay on the couch, waiting. The same instrument that had once been his voice now mocked him with silence. He tried to play once. The sound came out uneven, broken. His fingers wouldn't obey him. The bow slipped from his trembling hand. He didn't try again. Mary did what she could. Warm meals, quiet reassurances, a brave smile that fooled no one. But Jack changed. The man who once filled the house with music now filled it with silence. He stopped going to cafes, stopped meeting friends, stopped laughing. The violin went back into its case, and dust slowly claimed it. To keep himself busy, Jack started repairing old instruments in the garage, violins, guitars, anything people brought in. His right hand still worked fine, and it gave him something to hold on to. But each repair was a painful reminder of what he'd lost, fixing other people's dreams, while his own lay shattered in the corner. Sometimes, late at night, Ethan would hear faint sobs coming from the workshop, followed by the creak of the old violin case opening. Then silence again. Always silence. Ethan didn't understand much. He just knew that his father, the man who once made the whole town smile, now couldn't even smile at himself. And Mary, she carried the weight of 3 hearts. She worked long hours at the diner, came home tired, and still managed to sit beside Jack, holding his good hand in hers. "We'll be okay," she'd whisper. But even she knew, no words could fix what music once healed. The house that once danced with jazz now echoed with absence. The notes, the rhythm, the laughter, gone. But somewhere in that silence, in the heart of a quiet 13-year-old boy, something was beginning to stir. Ethan didn't know it yet, but one day, he would find a way to bring the music back. The winters in Oak Ridge always felt longer after the accident. Frost would crawl across the windows, and the cold would sneak into the house, wrapping everything in a dull stillness. The same stillness that had settled over Jack Miller's heart. He spent his days in the garage now. The small space smelled of wood polish and dust, filled with half-repaired guitars, violins, and clarinets stacked like forgotten memories. He barely spoke anymore. Each morning, Ethan would peek through the doorway on his way to school and find his father hunched over a workbench, tools scattered, eyes tired. Fixing other people's instruments had become his way of surviving, a quiet ritual to drown the ache of never being able to play his own. Mary worked double shifts at the diner, often coming home past midnight. Her hands were raw from washing dishes, her voice hoarse from long days. Yet she always found a moment to kiss Ethan's forehead and whisper, "We're okay, sweetheart." But even Ethan could tell, she was trying to convince herself as much as him. Ethan spent more and more time watching his father. The way Jack's hand trembled when he picked up a violin, the way his eyes softened, then turned away quickly as if to hide the pain. It broke something inside the boy, something innocent. He missed the laughter, the sound of his dad humming while cooking breakfast, the life that once filled their small home. Sometimes Jack would let Ethan hand him tools, though he rarely said a word. Yet, in those quiet moments, Ethan noticed something. When his father talked about music, even for a second, his eyes came alive again. That tiny spark made Ethan think, if I could just bring the music back, maybe I could bring him back too. One evening, while helping clean the garage, Ethan noticed a violin case tucked beneath a dusty tarp. The old brown leather was cracked, the edges worn smooth by years of use. He hesitated, but curiosity pulled him closer. He ran his fingers over the case, whispering, "Dad's," and for a second, he could almost hear faint music, like an echo from a happier time. That night, lying in bed, Ethan couldn't sleep. The image of that violin wouldn't leave his mind. He made himself a silent promise. He would find a way to fix what his father had lost, even if it took everything he had. Ethan waited until the house fell silent before sneaking into the garage. The moonlight spilled through the cracked window, falling over the scattered instruments. The violin case still sat beneath the tarp, waiting, as if it had been waiting for him all along. He lifted it carefully onto the workbench. Dust rose like smoke when he opened it. Inside lay the violin, its strings broken, its bridge warped, the varnish faded. It looked wounded, but Ethan saw more than wood and wire. He saw his father's voice, trapped in silence. He touched the strings, and one snapped loose with a faint twang. He flinched, then smiled. "Guess we'll start from there," he whispered. That night was the first of many. Every day after school, Ethan would rush home, finish his chores, and wait until his parents slept. Then he'd slip into the cold garage, pull out an old tablet, and watch videos on how to repair violins. He studied every screw, every curve, every note. He borrowed tools from his father's workbench and scavenged parts from broken instruments lying around. At first, everything went wrong. The glue wouldn't hold, the strings wouldn't tighten, and the sound was just a hollow squeak. His fingers blistered. His eyes burned from exhaustion. But he kept going. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. The garage became his secret classroom. Sometimes, when frustration took over, he'd whisper to the violin, "You were Dad's dream. Now you're mine too." One evening, while sanding the violin's bridge, Ethan didn't notice Jack standing quietly at the doorway. The light from the lamp flickered against the boy's determined face, his hands trembling but steady enough to hold the delicate wood. Jack's first instinct was to stop him, to say, "Leave it alone." But something in his son's eyes froze him. That same spark he once had when he played for the first time. So he said nothing, just turned away, tears threatening to fall. By spring, the violin looked alive again. Not perfect, but whole. Ethan wiped it clean, strung it with care, and held his breath as he tuned it. He didn't know what to expect. He just wanted to hear something, anything. That night, the power went out. The house was wrapped in darkness, and Mary lit a single candle in the kitchen. Ethan sat alone in the garage, the finished violin in his lap. The silence was heavy, but this time, he wasn't afraid of it. He lifted the bow. His hand shook. The first sound that came out was uneven, rough, but it was music. He played again, slower this time, remembering the melody his father used to hum before bed. It was Jack's old tune, the one he'd composed years ago. The faint notes floated through the open door, soft as a whisper. In the hallway, Jack froze. His chest tightened. He followed the sound, each step heavier than the last. When he reached the garage door, he saw his son, eyes closed, swaying slightly, playing his broken violin back to life. Jack's throat tightened. His good hand gripped the doorframe. He wanted to speak, but no words came. When Ethan stopped, he turned and saw his father standing there. For a long moment, neither said a word. The candlelight from the kitchen danced between them. Then Jack stepped forward, his eyes glistening. That was my song," he whispered. Ethan nodded, his voice trembling. "I know. I fixed it, Dad." Jack knelt beside him, his good hand resting on the violin. Tears rolled down his face, silent, raw, unrestrained. "You didn't just fix it, son," he said softly. "You fixed me." And for the first time in years, the house wasn't silent anymore. It sang. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the windows, soft, golden, alive. For the first time in years, the Miller home felt lighter. Jack sat quietly at the kitchen table, the violin resting beside his coffee cup. He kept glancing at it like it was an old friend who'd somehow returned from the dead. He couldn't play anymore, not the way he used to, but he could teach. And Ethan, he was eager to learn. Day after day, they worked side by side in the garage. Jack guided with his voice, Ethan with his hands. They repaired old violins, fixed broken guitars, and retuned forgotten flutes. Soon, word spread across Oak Ridge. The boy who restored his father's violin was bringing music back to broken instruments. One afternoon, a teacher from the local elementary school visited. Her voice cracked as she explained how the school couldn't afford new instruments for its music program. Ethan and Jack exchanged a glance. They didn't even have to speak. Within weeks, they started repairing instruments for free. Every child who walked through that garage left with a smile and a sound. The workshop that once held silence now pulsed with laughter, music, and life. The local newspaper ran a story. Father and son revived the sound of hope. Soon, they were invited to Portland for a community music festival. Jack insisted Ethan perform one of his own compositions. Backstage, Jack stood with his hand resting on his son's shoulder, the same hand that could no longer play, but had taught so much. As the spotlight found Ethan, he lifted the same violin he'd once rebuilt in secret. The melody filled the hall, stronger, brighter, and purer than before. In the front row, Jack closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. The music didn't just echo through the room. It reached every place silence had once lived. That night, as the crowd stood applauding, Jack whispered to Mary, "He didn't just bring back my song. He gave it a future." And for the first time in a long time, Jack Miller smiled. Years passed. Seasons changed. The small town of Oak Ridge grew, and so did Ethan Miller. The boy who once fixed his father's violin had become a man, a sound engineer known for creating adaptive instruments for disabled musicians. His studio in downtown Portland was filled with prototypes, guitars with modified grips, violins that could be played one-handed, and flutes with digital breath sensors. Every design told a story, his father's story. One wall of his office was covered with photos. Children smiling with their repaired instruments, newspaper clippings from the early days, and in the center, a framed violin. The same one he had rebuilt all those years ago. Beneath it hung a small brass plaque that read, "For my father, whose silence taught me to listen." Jack Miller never returned to the stage, but he didn't need to. His music lived in every person his son helped, in every sound Ethan restored to the world. He often visited the studio, still walking with a slight limp, still carrying that calm smile that only comes from pride too deep for words. Sometimes, he'd sit quietly in the corner while Ethan worked, eyes following his son's steady hands. "You've built something beautiful, Ethan," he'd say softly. And Ethan would always reply, "I just finished what you started, Dad." When Jack passed away a few years later, the town gathered in the school auditorium, the same one where Ethan had once played his father's tune. The children's choir performed that very melody again, their voices filling the hall like sunlight through stained glass. It wasn't sad. It was peaceful. It was home. After the service, Ethan walked alone to the old garage behind their house. The space was smaller than he remembered, quieter, but still carrying the faint scent of varnish and old wood. He sat at the same workbench where it all began, ran his fingers along the worn grooves, and smiled. The world outside had changed. Technology, cities, everything faster and louder, but inside that room, time stood still. It was where one man's broken dream had been reborn through the hands of a boy who refused to give up. Ethan picked up a violin, one of his new designs, and began to play. The notes filled the air, soft and strong, echoing through the open window. Neighbors paused, children laughed, and someone whispered, "The Miller's music is back." As the final note faded into the evening air, Ethan looked up, his eyes glistening. "I fixed your dream, Dad," he whispered. "And now, it'll never break again." The camera pans back, the old garage glowing in the sunset, filled with the sound of laughter, music, and hope. The silence was gone, and in its place, a symphony of dreams. If this story touched your heart, share it, and help the world hear the music of hope again. Don't let this story end here. Share it, and be part of someone's comeback.